now to a focus on consumer products, corporate ownership, and the work of the individuals, work for hire done for the corporation, not for the individual. I think this is a major cultural shift, the three different cultural shifts, from the concern with intellectual property as art and creativity of works of imagination, to technology, which is valuable for wealth to the individual, to technology, which is valuable for the wealth of the corporation. And I think this is a major shift that's taken place, which gives muscle now to the questions that I'm raising. This is an article, one of the editors of Choices is here at your university, on two businesses. I won't go into this in the detail that I might, but the question has to do with Argentina. Argentina has soybeans, and soybean seed market is 3 times the corn market, yet little or no money is made by the leading branded seed companies. How can this happen? How can they be so different? Difference involves intellectual property. Corn's intellectual property is protected in Argentina, whereas soybeans is not. The protection of differences exists because corn is a hybrid and soybeans are not. And this is what the whole thing hinges on. If you alter the genetic code of an organism, it now becomes intellectual property. It no longer belongs to everybody. So if I alter any product, the farmer buys that product from me, just as if, in the same way that Dan can't take my book and publish it as his book, farmer can't take my ear of corn and save those seeds and plant them next year. Can't do that. That's the violation of intellectual property. So by making food products intellectual property, basically we use the laws that Milton argued for the protection of literary works, now protect the production of corn. Now, whether this is good or bad is something that I think we need to discuss, and I think there's a lot of room for discussion in this area. But I think it's very important for us to get involved in this as a case of a shifting culture, a changing culture that has very long and wide repercussions. You just got you probably don't know, here on the 29th of October, our College of Agriculture just got a big Monsanto gift for graduate fellowships to focus on intellectual property rights. So there are people here at your university that are very acutely aware of the value of intellectual property as a way of protecting technology, biotechnology. Your seed center is the world's largest public seed testing laboratory and the key to annual export of millions of dollars of American seed. So what you have is a genetic code which is owned by a producer. You can't save it and replant it. It requires new annual purchase. And in this mechanism, you gain control of the world food supply through the multinational corporations. So if we come back to the thing I was trying to put together in the first place by way of conclusion here, first place, we have interaction-based social perceptions. Okay, if I talk too fast or talk too slow, you might say it's because where I'm from, you might say something cultural about me, you might say it's because of the food I have. But food is one of the factors of that 15, and there are others, that can affect how you can categorize me, what you think about me. If we add to this individual personal histories, maybe you've known me over a period of time, and you see that I behave this way regularly or something, you begin to see this as part of my character in some way. If you don't know that I have a food allergy, or if I don't know I have a food allergy, it may well be that rather than part of my character, this is a response that I'm having to foods I'm eating. This has happened to me when I eliminated the allergies. In a great way, my personality changed. The world system of food production and distribution is a major part of this, because if I can't travel anywhere in the country without eating something I'm allergic to, these are characteristics that are going to be in my behavior every place I go and all of the time. And everybody is going to begin to draw those conclusions, I think. And what makes that the case? Intellectual property law. That's what gives it a muscle. That's what keeps people from being able to do something else with these seeds, and that's what gives the power to distribute food so widely through our food system. Well, is this intercultural communication? I don't know if it is or not. By many people's definitions, probably not. By my definition, it is, because it's communication across people who see the world in very, very different ways and need to come to some way of understanding how other people in that world are seeing it. I think if we see social interaction as the productive nexus of these conclusions we make about other people, and if we see such things as the intellectual property laws in the world system as one of the ways that this nexus is produced, we can begin to see that there is in fact a very, very complex network of things that needs to be worked out. My feeling is that linguists are in a good position to look at this. I would reiterate what Guy Cook says. These studies are rooted in the need for better communication between specialists and non-specialists in areas of scientific risk and uncertainty, particularly for food safety. So, you are what you eat, or you are what people say you are because of what you eat, or you are what people say you are because of what the world productions system of food production makes you eat. Okay? Whatever it is, I think there's a connection between these cultural and personal attributions and the world system that we live in. And I think as linguists, we can examine this. And so I was reminded in putting this together of the Keats section from Keats' poem, that self-singing song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth. Sick for home, she stood in tears amid the alien corn. Thank you very much. Some corn in the cob and feeling a little hungry. Yes?
I share your concern about the dual food system, and I think that language-based investigation I'm looking forward to the publication of the GMO language book, which is still not printed here in the United States. But I'm wondering about the link in, and there's plenty of things wrong with the intellectual property system too, but I'm wondering if that really links. My understanding is that the reason that you have to buy corn from a seed seller is that it's a hybrid, and you want the hybrid characteristics. You have to buy it from a person that's willing to do the work of hybridization, and once you use that seed, the next generation's not a hybrid. So that you just can't get it's not a matter of intellectual property, it's just a matter of genetics, that you can't get the properties of corn you want except if you buy them from somebody that's doing the hybridization work. Okay, so that's number one on corn. If it was an intellectual property matter, then we'd expect now soy to be at least as big because of genetic engineering giving ownership rights to soy. But at least one indication of what we're seeing is massive piracy of intellectual property rights, particularly in third world countries like Brazil, just
not third world country.
From the point of view of Monsanto, stealing their soy. There's a lot of evidence that China has as much intellectual property theft in agriculture as they do like with all sorts of other media. And then there's, I think,
Pornography. Pornography is the main American intellectual property that Chinese are accused of
I'm
stealing.
glad to hear that we're exporting something. Better more worthwhile than corn. So anyhow, it seems to me that the corn problem in particular, the protection of corn, is kind of an inevitable result of genetics and the need for hybrids. And the intellectual property thing is more complicated and it's still in the process of sorting itself out. And mechanisms like theft may end up overpowering the kind of thin protection. So.
Well, all I can say is, yes, you're absolutely right. There's no question about that. It is a muddy field right now. International intellectual property law is absolutely in its infancy. There are some things, but the codes are not widely agreed, I'm sure you know, not widely agreed upon. They're certainly not there's no particular mechanism to enforce agreement on these things. We did a study of intellectual property in the Hong Kong media and found that in every article that made reference to intellectual property, they also made reference to violations of human rights, which I think is a good bit less connected, right? But, so what happens now is that when people decide that somebody is bad for some reason, what they do is they call in all of the reasons they think they're bad and kind of lump them together in some way. And these things all have to be sorted out. And what I'm calling for, if nothing else, is sorting out just what does it mean? What are the actual consequences? There are some cases that I've heard of in which companies are actually bringing cases against people, not because they lost the hybridity, but because they in fact replanted corn.
GMO corn.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's a case where you're actually suing somebody, not because they just lost the hybridity of it, but because they stole your property. You know, so there are clear cases of that, but they're not across the board, they're not in every case, and it still has to be sorted out. I don't think we have a clear notion internationally. We don't have an international standard of intellectual property because there's a lot of variation. And as you say, the other side of it is that one of the ways, certainly the software development companies have done their development is to encourage piracy. They release beta versions in Thailand and Hong Kong and so forth, so that people will take these things and work the bugs out of them, and then they come in and prosecute later because it's a little more convenient. Furthermore, a student of mine in Hong Kong did a master's thesis on intellectual property violations, and it's quite interesting which countries are actually the biggest violators. The biggest in the world was Germany, okay? Then second to that was the United States, and then was Australia. And China and Japan and the usual ones were way down the list in terms of actual cases of intellectual property. So it's a very complicated business. And really all I wanted to do in what I was saying, and I hope I've done it well enough, is to say there's several ways that as a linguist we can come to these issues. And one is the progressive redefinition of what is a property. Intellectual property in the original notion was ours. You know, it was for protection of works of writing, right? And then it's been extended to mean other things and other things. And I don't know how far we want that to extend, but one thing I can say is that if our interest as linguists is in semiotic codes, intellectual property is nothing but semiotic code. And it's just a question, does it belong to the lawyers, does it belong to the linguists? And I'd say we all ought to be involved in the discussion.
Yeah, I guess my point is that the corn example, I think you're about to get a lot more examples because the intellectual property issue really is driving the GMO litigation. While the past stuff about corn and the fact you can't say seed corn is not based in intellectual property but based in something else. So in fact, we're about to have an explosion of things, I think, that will be very good for your study.
Well, I'm glad I'm going to be retiring soon. Any other questions?
Can you comment on the perceived benefit of intellectual property or the cultural differences among GMOs and the benefits of GMOs? For instance, if GMOs start to solve some health problems of communities, that might, some companies are banking on that happening and changing perceptions. So my question is, how does the perceived benefit of this technological change break down cultural barriers, misunderstandings, or different valuations that people put, or cultures put on?
Right. In responding to this question, I'll refer to Guy Cook's book because he's the one that's actually looked at this. I haven't studied this area itself. But one of the things he did was to look at massive interviews of producers mostly foods, but some drugs and some other things. Media reports and then public food things. And one of the first things he noticed, which is very important, is each of these entities created itself as a kind of hard, inviolable entity. So the scientists who worked in biotechnology, if a scientist said, there's some question about this, they would say, well, he's not a scientist. He's not a real scientist, because real scientists all see it this way. Okay, and then the people opposing the technology from some of the NGOs and others would say, well, there might be a benefit, and say, well, you know, you're not one of us, you're on their side. And so what's happening in the discourse is everybody is creating these cultures that are really not so distinct. There's plenty of people working in every single area, examining these things and trying to say, what are we doing, where are we going? But there's a tendency in the media, according to him, really like to push this very hard. They like to push, like we were back to that sort of national culture notion, they like to push the idea that there is one and only one science of biotechnology, and all of those people agree and they know who they are, and nobody else is a real scientist. And there's the public that opposes. But what Guy says is, well, okay, so a scientist may work all day in the laboratory, but he's still a member of the public when he goes shopping in the grocery store and when he talks to his friends. And yet this notion of these being such distinct cultures is producing more problems than it's solving. So I think that's where we can come into with the approach we're taking, is saying, look, there's an awful lot going on here. The science isn't clear science in every case and in every way. Some of it is hypothetical, some of it's very well established. We don't know where it's going exactly. There's no point in saying there is a science of biotechnology and they have a position and they have a value. That is a nonsensical position. Even if you oppose the thing, it's a nonsensical position. On the other hand, if what you're trying to do is to market to a public, I think makes a big mistake to say, well, the public sees it this way or they see it that. The public sees things in a lot of different ways. And so what you have to do is find out, in fact, how does the public see it? What are the variety of responses? So that's what Guy Cook argues for, and that's where I think we can come into it, because what we need is the discussion without the creation of opposing views. That's what we're trying to get to. It's a hard place to get because people have strong feelings about it.
30 years ago, my brother and I would buy hogs at the Iowa State University testing station, boar hogs, to improve our herds on my family farm. And these hogs were not altered genetically. They were a product of selective breeding and natural selection, what have you. Today, if I were to go into the hog business, I would, out of necessity, not have a herd of 30 hogs. I'd have to have a herd of 3,000 to 10,000 hogs in order to be profitable. And my breeding stock would be genetically altered and genetically programmed stock. Now, I guess what my point is, I totally agree with what you're saying, because I think it's very important that we look at protecting what we eat in terms of definition. But also, our world has sort of developed into, our systems of production have gone so far from the ancient people who were protecting their intellectual rights, that how can you legitimately draw this parallel?
I didn't quite follow the very last step of that.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that the way we do business now is so different. I mean, it's out of these huge volumes. We can't have a herd of 50 hogs on 100 farms in every section.
Yeah,
We have to, it just has to be done differently.
Yeah, well, I'm a linguist, so I can't tell you how you should grow hogs, or even what's the most profitable way to do it. What I can say about it is what you pointed to is, I think, is extremely important. Has to do with time and scale. That one of the things that I think is very clear is that a big difference between the way we modified things historically and the way we do it now is time scale. Okay, and what is technology anyway? I mean, if somebody just selectively over 3 generations breeds a better set of hogs to sell, they've modified that gene pool, and they've done it intentionally, so do you
They
have to?
couldn't patent it.
Well, no, but they didn't have intellectual property law then, and they might have decided. Now, what I don't know about this is that with the time scale, and one of the things that happens is that we're compressing into a much, much shorter period of time, the speed at which we can bring about changes. And this is true with computer technology, or it's true with automobile, any technology you look at. As we compress those time scales, I think what we have to do is look at how we think of these big issues, language, cultural issues. And I'd say in many cases what we're doing is applying thinking that comes from sort of one time scale and one way of thinking to a completely different one. They don't match. Okay? When they don't match, you've got an intercultural problem. Now, whether it happens across time, within the same cultural group, or between two cultural groups in different places. It's the same kind of problem. How do we talk to each other in a way that we can understand what's going on with you and you can understand what's going on, so we don't lose track of who and what we are? That's what I'm asking us to do in every way we can.
It's so abstract though, the people who are gonna be waging these arguments are gonna be the universities and the attorneys, and the people who are out there buying the food will be oblivious.
Well, you know, one of the things that wasn't mentioned when I was introduced was that I was in political office one time. I ran for office, I got elected, and one of the reasons I did it, was in a small town, so it's not a big deal, was that I had spent some years working in a school of education. I was very interested in education, and I particularly was concerned with how does education, the stuff that we were working on, affect somebody teaching in a classroom, somebody trying to run a school in a small town, with exactly the beliefs that you have in mind. And I thought there's no way to do that except get elected to the school board and sit there and have to vote, and then see what made me work. Now, when I sat there with a vote coming up, and I thought to myself, now of all of those things that I learned at the university and all that research that I did, how much of that is going to be useful in deciding this vote? And I can tell you how much. It's a very small amount, very, very small amount. And I think that's the case. And there again, this is my same point. There's a huge cultural difference right within what is called the same culture. The way academics do research and think about topics, and the way people who are on the ground having to make their day-to-day decisions is very, very different. And if those people can't find ways of communicating with each other, we're just going to keep going on doing the same things. People who are buying food that they don't want to eat, that they don't like, that they can't find any other place, are going to say, it's just those, damn agribusiness people, we can't do this. And the people who are in business of selling it say, we can't figure out why the customers won't accept this, we can't figure out why they won't take it. Well, they're going to talk to each other somehow. That's why I say agriculture is an intercultural communication problem right now. That's the point I'm trying to make. I haven't got an immediate solution to it. I tell you, like I say, I'm glad I'm headed for retirement, but we've got to try to do it.
I sense among the 15 factors, one of them had to do with the political, the power arrangement. But as I hear you talk, and I must be wrong on this, but as I hear you talk, I think that there's a sense that if only we could just communicate better, that these problems will be solved. And yet, when I hear American agricultural producers or American corporations talking, attributing, why do the Europeans not accept GMOs in general? They will attribute to things like, they're ignorant of the science, they just don't understand the science, and that's why they don't accept GMOs. Other times they will say, well, it's the lobbying efforts of European farmers who are fighting competition from the U.S. and attribute it in those ways. And similarly, Europeans will make attributions which say, well, Americans are not willing to look at the possibilities of the degradation of humanity and the environment and so on, and give those sorts of explanations. But they will also say, well, it's the greed of the American corporations. I guess what I'm asking is, how do you factor into communication questions of interests?
Yeah. Well, I think they're absolutely fundamental. I don't see any two ways about that. And this is one of the things that Cook addresses in his book, so I recommend that to you. One of the points that he makes is that the kind of prototypical position created in the science of GMO. Now, this is created by some GMO scientists, more often by marketers, more often by media, but nevertheless, it's a position that's created, is that only science will be able to tell us the answers. And if anything else isn't capable of doing it. And then if you look at people in the public, say, well, it has nothing to do with the science. It has to do with these other issues. It has to do with, let's say, religious values, or it has to do with, should we change what human beings are? And there's no science that could ever resolve those questions. Furthermore, if you go back to the scientists themselves, and Cook does this quite well, he goes through a whole bunch of arguments, so-called scientific arguments, for adoption of genetically modified foods, which are all economic ones. They've done no science of the economics. They've done science of the modification of the organisms, but the scientists are telling you the economic reasons you should do And so what he argues, they use an entirely non-scientific argument to argue that only science can resolve this. Okay, so this is a way you can come at these things kind of critically. You can look at it and say, okay, now, if science can decide this, what is science? What do you mean by that? Where do you apply it? When are you not using it? And apply it to everything you do yourself in making your argument. Okay, as soon as you do that, then you start seeing the lines of Fisher. And so you find, in fact, that people who are arguing with the scientific card are not using much science to do it. This is his argument. And the people who are arguing against this values card and so forth are using other kinds of little tricks to do this. And so that's what we're looking at. We're trying to, we come at it, I don't want to call it a critical discourse because we're not doing it exactly that way. But what you want to do is look at the various discourses people are using to advance their positions. And then behind that, you can see what are their interests for saying this rather than that. Why, we're putting this stuff in our products so that we can enhance the nutrition claims on the label. Once we can start pulling these things out, we can see why people are saying what they're saying. Now we're in a position, we may not like them better, but we know more clearly the position. And we might not like our own position much better, but we see clearly what we're creating. And I think that's a rather important strategy for us to take.
One more. As I was hearing it, and I think it's a critical point for transformation in terms of figuring out, proposals and different companies and issues of uptake. When you're looking at, people making claims in terms of tax net, in the sense that there's a system to legitimize the claim that this is different, even though what they're doing there in terms of the see the case. But by appealing to a particular system, in this case, making that transformation. So there are any particular point where you can look at how people could take that label that they get, because it's ultimately
Yeah, I think that's really quite an important thing. Overall, I mean, we can look at, I've just mentioned it with science. Right now, sort of throughout the American society, there's sort of two domains. One domain is in which science is the absolute authority. You want to prove something, science is right. And there's another domain in which values and intuitions carry the day in terms of authority. Doesn't matter what the science says, this is my value, this is what I'm going to do. And, in a sense, that's one of the big cultural divides we have in the U.S. right now. Where do you go for your authority? What do you rely on? What do you trust when you don't know? I mean, most of us can't cover the whole ground. We don't know all of these things. And so you got to trust somebody somewhere. So what are the legitimating sources of authority by which people make their arguments? And we find that actually the disagreements often happen at that level. That, I make my argument on the basis of I do science. But you're making your argument on something, well, we're not talking the same language, we're not coming from the same position. So part of a critical analysis, I would say, of any of these public discourses is to look at what are the legitimating authorities or presuppositions, you could say, that people make about what it takes to make a legitimate argument. Schills said this many years ago about science. I'm not really here to trounce science by any means. I'm not here to sell corn. But Schills made the argument many years ago that, well, scientists would say that the only real, I think they would say something like this, the only real test of truth is some kind of experimental process by which you experiment on the world, you make hypotheses, you draw conclusions, this sort of stuff. The vast majority of science, that the vast majority of scientists have, they got on authority from reading textbooks and scientific articles, not from doing experiments. They received it by authority in written texts, okay? And, so scientists don't, in fact, start off to recreate the world through experimentation. There is a massive sense of authority that's built through written texts that scientists use as part of their authority. That's fine, that's entirely legitimate, because there is no way, we'd be crazy if we started every morning and said, we've got to start fresh on this. We had, there was somebody, in Haynes was getting married, and they asked us for a book, and we recommended one. She gave it to her friend, and I said, I don't like that book at all, because that book says, by Wendell Berry, if anybody reads that, says, things like marriage take a lot of work and a lot of commitment, and a lot of things that are worth doing in life take a lot more work, and if you wake up in the morning and say, I don't think I'm gonna raise hogs today, or whatever it is, you're gonna be in trouble, it's just not gonna work out, there's a lot of things we have to do like that, including marriage. And she said, I don't agree with that, every day I wanna wake up and I wanna think, today I wanna be married. Today I want to get married. This is what she's telling me. She goes out with my daughter then, she was about 10. She's like, you'd think she'd have breakfast first anyway.